A woman asked for help in a store to buy just a little bread. The shop assistant followed her to her house, and what he saw when he entered made him break down in tears. The doorbell echoed, a familiar sound for Josh, who barely lifted his eyes from the cash register. It was a quiet morning in the small neighborhood shop where he worked. The same crowded shelves, the same basic goods barely kept in order, and the steady flow of customers who seemed to fit into a predetermined routine. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that day was not like the others. Josh looked up almost automatically when the bell rang again. What he saw made him pause for a moment. A woman entered with slow steps, almost as if she feared being noticed. Her clothes were visibly worn, and a small, faded bag hung from her shoulder with an air of abandonment. But what truly caught his attention was her face, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and a hollowed gaze that, despite everything, held a strange intensity. It was the kind of look that could tell 1,000 stories, all wrapped in pain. Josh watched as she moved cautiously through the aisles, almost trembling. Her thin, rough hands ran over the products as if assessing more than just their price. Finally, she stopped at the bread section and picked one of the smallest loaves. She held it in her hands for a moment, before walking to the counter. When she reached the counter, Josh noticed she held a few coins in her hand, barely enough to pay. However, when she began to speak, her voice was so low he could barely hear her. "Could you help me?" she said, then paused, as if struggling with every word. "I'm a little short for this." Josh blinked, surprised by the shyness in her tone and the evident shame she carried. It wasn't unusual for someone to ask for help in the neighborhood, but something about her disarmed him. Perhaps it was the way she avoided looking at him directly, or the slight tremble in her hands as she held the bread and coins. Without saying anything, he took the bread and scanned it at the register. Then, in an instinctive gesture, he pushed the package toward her, not caring about the missing money. "Don't worry, it's fine," he said, trying to sound casual. The woman looked up briefly, and Josh saw something in her eyes, a mix of relief and resignation. She nodded slightly, said nothing more, and hurried out of the store, clutching the bread to her chest as if it were a treasure. Josh watched her disappear through the door and felt a strange weight in the air, as if it had grown heavier. He tried to return to his routine, but couldn't shake the image of the woman from his mind. Who was she? What had led her to be in that situation? Why did something as simple as a loaf of bread seem so important to her? That night, in his small apartment, Josh couldn't stop thinking about her. His life was a monotonous routine, marked by the lack of aspirations and dreams he had long abandoned. But something about that woman had stirred a restlessness he couldn't ignore. While eating dinner in front of the TV, his mind kept returning to her face, her eyes, and the way she had held the bread. Something wasn't right, and though he didn't know why, he felt he had to find out. The next day, without knowing exactly what he was looking for, Josh decided he would keep an eye out. Maybe he would see her again, maybe not. But deep down, he knew that encounter had changed something in him, though he couldn't yet understand what it was. The store's bell rang again the next day, but it wasn't Angel who entered. Josh, who had spent the entire night haunted by the image of the woman, felt disappointed to realize she wouldn't return so easily. His curiosity had transformed into something more, a nagging feeling that made him question if he should have done more than just give her the bread. The day passed uneventfully, but just as the evening approached and Josh went to arrange products near the entrance, he saw her. Angel was crossing the street a few meters from the store, with the same faded bag and a small sack that seemed to hold only a few items. She walked quickly, with her head down, as if trying to go unnoticed. Josh watched her for a moment, torn between leaving her alone or following her. He had no reasonable motive to do so, but something about her demeanor deeply unsettled him. His life had always been quiet and predictable, and this surge of curiosity caught him off guard. Leaving his co-worker in charge of the store, Josh slipped out discreetly, keeping a cautious distance behind Angel. She didn't look back even once, moving with the same caution she had shown in the store. The streets she walked became narrower and gloomier, moving away from the bustle of the neighborhood. Josh recognized the area. It was a marginalized zone he had only heard stories about, a place he'd never had a reason to visit. Angel stopped in front of an old, dilapidated building. The windows were broken on some floors, and graffiti-covered walls added to its oppressive atmosphere, as if even the air resisted entering. Angel climbed the exterior stairs, which creaked under her weight, and disappeared inside. Josh, unsure, moved close enough to peer through a broken window on the ground floor. Inside, the light was dim, and the interior looked as worn as the exterior. Angel was in a small room with walls stained by dampness. She moved slowly, placing items on a table covered with a cloth. Squinting, Josh could make out photographs, candles, and withered flowers, carefully arranged around what seemed to be an improvised altar. At the center of the altar were two photographs. The first showed a little girl with a radiant smile and bright eyes, full of life. The second was of a middle-aged man, serene and kind-looking. Josh felt a lump in his throat at the tenderness with which Angel arranged every detail. Her face, which had seemed so hardened the previous day, now displayed a vulnerability that moved him. Unknowingly, Josh leaned closer to the window, trying to hear what Angel was murmuring as she moved the objects. Her voice was low, and the words were hard to make out, but the tone was unmistakable. Sorrow, deep and heart-wrenching. Something about the scene made him step back. He didn't know exactly why, but he felt he was intruding on a private moment, something that wasn't meant to be seen. He retraced his steps, leaving the building with a sense of unease he couldn't shake. Angel wasn't just a woman in need. There was a weight to her life, a pain that consumed her and now had touched Josh in a way he didn't fully understand. When he returned to his apartment that night, the echo of what he had seen haunted him. The altar, the photographs, Angel's expression as she moved the candles, all pointed to a story he was just beginning to glimpse. But one thing was clear: his encounter with her wasn't accidental, and now he felt, somehow, involved. As he lay on his old sofa, his untouched dinner before him, a decision began to take shape in his mind. He couldn't simply ignore what he had seen. Angel needed more than a loaf of bread, though he didn't yet know what. For the first time in a long while, Josh felt his monotonous life might change, and though the prospect scared him, it also intrigued him. The building where he had seen Angel wouldn't leave his mind. In the days that followed, as he worked at the store, every customer who entered and every shelf he reorganized seemed like a meaningless distraction. The image of the altar, the photographs, and the palpable sadness in Angel's movements haunted him like a constant echo. What lay behind that scene? What kind of life was this woman leading? Josh wasn't someone who easily got involved in others' problems, but something about her had touched him in a deep and unfamiliar way. Finally, one evening after closing the shop, Josh decided to return to the building. The walk felt longer than he remembered, perhaps because now he carried not just curiosity, but also a nervous unease. When he arrived, the place looked just as bleak as before. The external stairs creaked under his weight, and for a moment, he thought about turning back, leaving everything as it was. But something inside pushed him forward. Josh knocked gently on Angel's apartment door. There was no response. He hesitated for a moment and knocked again, this time a bit louder. Through the door, he could hear faint movement, as if someone was nearby, but no footsteps. When the door finally opened, Angel stood there, looking at him with a mix of surprise and weariness. At first, she said nothing, just observed him with eyes that seemed even more sunken than the last time he saw her. Feeling like an intruder, Josh tried to offer an excuse. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Angel stared at him in silence for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Then, without a word, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Josh was surprised by the gesture but accepted. cautiously crossing the threshold. The inside of the apartment was even more depressing than he had imagined. The walls were stained and peeling, and the few pieces of furniture seemed ready to collapse. The air carried a faint scent of burnt candles and withered flowers. In the center of the room was the altar Josh had seen from the window. Up close, he could make out every detail. The photograph of the little girl held a heartbreaking innocence, while the man's photo radiated warmth and kindness. The flowers, though wilted, were arranged with a care that contrasted sharply with the neglected state of the rest of the apartment. Among them were handwritten notes and an open notebook filled with scribbles that resembled maps or diagrams. The dim light from the burnt-out candles cast an almost ritualistic aura over the scene. Josh didn't know what to say. For the first time, he felt the weight of another person's life in a way that overwhelmed him. Angel, noticing his discomfort, broke the silence. "They were my family," she said in a low but steady voice, pointing to the photographs. "My husband Andrew and my daughter Sophie." Josh nodded, waiting for her to continue. She did, though haltingly, as if each word was a struggle. "They were everything to me. Andrew was the kindest man I ever knew, always looking out for others. Sophie, she was light, pure light, always singing, always laughing." Angel paused and took a deep breath, as if the next words were the hardest of all. "It all ended one rainy night, 3 years ago. We were coming back from celebrating Sophie's birthday. We were singing in the car. She was so happy. And then, out of nowhere, another car hit us. It happened so fast." Josh felt a lump in his throat as Angel spoke. Her voice, though controlled, carried an emotion that cut through him. "They died instantly. I survived. Sometimes I wish I hadn't." Josh tried to say something, anything that might comfort her, but the words wouldn't come. Angel didn't seem to expect them. She continued, her tone now tinged with bitterness. "The driver was Richard Sandoval, an untouchable businessman. He was drunk. They arrested him at first, but nothing came of it. His money, his power, the system protected him. Within weeks, he was free, as if nothing had happened." The anger in her voice filled the room, but Angel visibly forced herself to calm down and look directly at Josh. "Since then, my life has been this: surviving, breathing, and planning. He took everything from me, Josh, and I won't let that stand." For the first time, Josh understood what lay behind the altar and Angel's gaze. It wasn't just sadness, it was something much deeper, a blend of pain, powerlessness, and determination. Though he still didn't know how to react, something inside him told him he couldn't turn his back on what he had just heard. That night, as he left the building, Josh carried Angel's words with him. Alongside them came a new feeling, a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but now found impossible to ignore. The next day at the store, Josh felt different. The disordered shelves and familiar faces of regular customers seemed insignificant compared to what he'd heard the night before. Angel's story weighed on his mind, along with a persistent question: what could he do? He wasn't influential, nor did he have the resources to take on a man like Richard Sandoval. But he couldn't just stand by. In the midst of his confusion, he thought of Kevin, his journalist friend. Kevin wasn't perfect, ambitious, and often cynical, but he had a knack for uncovering stories that made an impact. Josh wondered if Kevin might be able to help, though he felt a pang of uncertainty about sharing something so personal. That afternoon, during his break, Josh called Kevin and invited him to meet at a nearby cafe. When Kevin arrived, Josh began to share Angel's story as carefully as he could. At first, Kevin listened with skepticism, but as Josh described the details of the accident, Sandoval's cover-up, and Angel's quiet struggle, the journalist's interest grew. "This is incredible, Josh," Kevin said, leaning forward with a gleam of excitement in his eyes. A man like Sandoval, with all his power, being confronted by a woman who's lost everything. This could be explosive. I'm not sure Angel wants that, Kevin, Josh said, frowning as doubts crept in about his decision to involve him. She's not looking for fame or attention, just justice. And that's exactly why her story is so powerful, Kevin said, gesturing animatedly. If we tell it the right way, we could expose Sandoval and force him to face the consequences. She can't do it alone. She needs the media. Josh wasn't convinced. He knew enough about Angel to understand that she trusted no one but herself. But Kevin pressed on, persuading Josh to at least present the idea to her. That same evening, Josh brought Kevin to Angel's apartment. He knew it was a risk, but he believed Kevin could be a key ally in leveling the playing field. When Angel opened the door and saw Josh with someone else, her eyes narrowed with distrust. Kevin, ever charismatic, introduced himself immediately. Good evening, Angel. I'm Kevin, a journalist. Josh has told me a bit about your situation, and I think I can help. Angel didn't respond right away. She looked at Josh, who tried to ease the tension. Kevin wants to help you expose Sandoval. He thinks that if the media gets involved, you might have a real chance. Angel's face hardened. Her already defensive posture became almost impenetrable. What do you know about real chances? She said in a low, reproachful tone. I tried that route at first. Do you know what happened? The articles disappeared. Journalists stopped answering my calls. Everyone has a price, and Sandoval has enough money to buy them all. Kevin raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, though his confident smile remained. I understand your distrust, Angel, but I'm not like those others. I have nothing to lose. My work is already independent of the big media outlets, and I have the connections to get this story to the public without filters. And then what? Angel interrupted, crossing her arms. Sandoval will destroy me before I can make a move. This isn't a movie. There's no happy ending for someone like me. Josh tried to interject. Angel, I know you don't trust the media, but Kevin has a point. You can't take him on alone. Sandoval has more resources than we can imagine. If we work together, we might have a chance. Angel looked at him incredulously, as if he had betrayed her by bringing a stranger into her sanctuary. Then her gaze softened, but only slightly. I don't need a journalist looking for fame or a hero trying to save me. What I need is to follow through with my plan. No one can help me more than I can help myself. Kevin, realizing his approach wasn't working, shifted tactics. You mentioned a plan, didn't you? He asked, intrigued. Let me help you make it more effective. I have resources, contacts, and ways to access information that could be crucial. For instance, did you know Sandoval is hosting a charity gala in a few days? An event full of cameras and influential people. You could use that as an opportunity to expose him in front of everyone. Angel's eyes flickered, but not with hope, rather with a mix of anger and defiance. I already know, and I don't need your help for that. Josh, sensing the tension rising, tried to mediate. Angel, Kevin just wants to help. At least let him make things easier for you. Angel shook her head, her voice firm and cutting. This is my fight, Josh. I decide how and with whom I fight it. Thank you for bringing him, but I don't need him. Kevin, frustrated but not ready to give up, stood up. If you change your mind, here's my number, he said, placing a card on the table before heading to the door. Your story deserves to be heard, Angel, and I want to help, even if you don't see it now. After Kevin left, Angel turned to Josh with a mix of exhaustion and disappointment. Don't ever do something like that again without asking me first. Josh nodded, feeling guilty. But deep down, he still believed Angel was facing a battle too big to fight alone. That night, as he walked back to his apartment, Josh couldn't stop wondering if he had done the right thing. Kevin was right about one thing. The charity gala was a unique opportunity. But if Angel refused help, how could they ensure everything went according to plan? Angel's refusal to accept Kevin's help left Josh in a state of confusion. Over the following days, as he worked in the store, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. "It's my fight." The firmness in her voice and her unshakable conviction had impressed him, but they also filled him with worry. How could she face someone as powerful as Sandoval on her own? That evening, after closing the store, Josh decided to take matters into his own hands. He couldn't shake the idea that there was more to Sandoval's story, details that might give them an edge. Though he wasn't a professional investigator, he knew how to use the internet and understood the basics of researching information. He powered up his old laptop and started looking for articles and news related to Richard Sandoval. What he found didn't surprise him, but it didn't reassure him either. Sandoval had an impeccable reputation as a businessman and philanthropist. His charitable foundations frequently appeared in the news, and he was known for funding education and health programs. However, in forums and social media, rumors swirled about his involvement in shady dealings, bribery, money laundering, and illegal contracts. None of it was official, and it seemed that whenever someone tried to expose him, the evidence vanished. During one of his searches, however, Josh came across a piece of information that intrigued him. Sandoval had a son, Luke, who suffered from a rare degenerative disease. There were few photos of him, and the ones that did exist showed a smiling but fragile boy with eyes that seemed wiser than his years. The information about Luke moved Josh. Although he hated Sandoval for what he had done to Angel, he couldn't ignore the weight of that illness in a father's life. What did it mean to be responsible for a tragedy while also caring for someone who depended on you completely? The thought unsettled him. The next morning, Josh decided to visit Angel to share what he had found. When he arrived at her apartment, he found her organizing papers on the table near the altar. Her expression was harsher than usual, as though she was channeling all her energy into her plan. "You again?" Angel said without looking at him, though her tone wasn't entirely hostile. Josh sat down, and after a few moments of hesitation, began to speak. "I've been looking into Sandoval. I found something interesting and complicated. He has a son, Luke. The boy's sick." Angel looked up, frowning. "So what?" "I don't know. It just made me think." Josh searched for the right words, afraid they would sound like an excuse. It's easy to hate him, and it makes sense after everything he did. But he's also a father going through something difficult. That doesn't justify him, I know, but I wonder if... Angel cut him off, her voice sharp with irritation. "Are you wondering if we should feel sorry for him? If that makes him any less guilty for what he did?" She shook her head, her tone a mix of disbelief and anger. "No, nothing changes what he did, Josh. Nothing brings back my husband and daughter. It doesn't matter if he has a sick child or 1,000 problems. He's responsible for his decisions, just like I am for mine." Josh stayed quiet, feeling small under the intensity of her gaze, but he couldn't help thinking about it. "It's not pity I feel, Angel. It's empathy, I guess. No one should suffer for someone else's mistakes. What will happen to Luke if all of this blows up?" Angel pressed her lips together, as if holding back a response. Then, after a long silence, she spoke in a calmer voice. "Luke isn't my problem. He never will be. But I understand what you're saying, Josh. Believe me, I think about all of this more than you realize. But my path is already set. There's no turning back." Josh nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. He knew Angel wouldn't change her mind, but he couldn't ignore his own doubts. When he left her apartment that afternoon, he carried with him an uncomfortable feeling. He wanted to help her, but he wasn't sure it could be on her terms. That night, as Josh reflected in his tiny apartment, he remembered something Kevin had mentioned: Sandoval's charity gala. It was a unique opportunity, and Angel seemed determined to use it. But now Josh wasn't just worried about her. He was concerned about what the outcome of her plan might mean for everyone involved, including the child Sandoval was protecting. For the first time, Josh found himself questioning not just justice, but the cost of achieving it. Angel's apartment was eerily quiet as she went over the details of her plan again and again. On the table near the altar were scattered papers filled with notes and diagrams that looked more like mind maps than detailed strategies. Angel wasn't an expert in espionage or complex operations, but she had learned to be meticulous. Every step of her infiltration into the charity gala was written down, every potential obstacle considered. It was a simple plan, but risky, and she knew it. Josh arrived at the apartment shortly after noon. He had been wrestling with himself over whether to support this plan or try to stop her. In the end, Angel's determination convinced him that she wouldn't change her mind. When he entered, he noticed the intensity in her expression, a focus so absolute that it seemed to block out everything else. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Josh asked, breaking the silence. Angel looked up but didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pointed to the map she had drawn of the hall where the gala would take place. "I've studied this place for weeks. I know where the guards will be, the security cameras, the emergency exits. All I need to do is get in, keep a low profile, and get what I came for." Josh approached the table and looked at the papers. He recognized the precision in her notes, but also noticed the limitations. The equipment she planned to use was basic, a phone with a recording app and a small hidden camera she had bought at a surveillance supply store. None of it guaranteed she would achieve her goal. "What if something goes wrong?" Josh pressed, his tone more serious. "What if they catch you? Angel, this isn't a game. Sandoval isn't someone who'll just let things slide." "Nothing can go worse than what's already happened," Angel replied, her voice cold but restrained. Josh exhaled deeply and sat in one of the apartment's rickety chairs. He wanted to support her, but every fiber of his being told him this was too dangerous. Still, he knew he couldn't stop her. There was only one thing he could do. "Let me help you," he said at last. Angel looked up, surprised. "No, Josh, I won't put you in danger. This is my fight, not yours." "I'm already involved, Angel." Josh paused, trying to keep his tone steady. "From the moment you walked into the store, I became part of this. I'm not going to stand by while you risk yourself alone. Let me at least be nearby in case something goes wrong." Angel stared at him in silence for a long moment. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but only as backup, nothing more. I handle the rest." Josh felt a wave of relief, though it didn't fully dispel his concerns. He knew this wasn't enough to guarantee Angel's safety, but it was a start. Together, they began reviewing the plan, tweaking details based on Josh's suggestions. He proposed that Angel wear more formal attire to blend in better with the guests, something she initially resisted, but eventually agreed to. They also decided that Josh would disguise himself as a waiter to move around unnoticed. However, there was one obstacle neither of them knew how to overcome: access to the event. The charity gala was exclusive, and invitations were strictly controlled. Angel had a fake ID she had acquired with great effort, but she wasn't sure it would work. Josh, for his part, started thinking about alternatives. The next day, Josh contacted Kevin, this time without Angel's knowledge. Although he knew she wouldn't approve, they needed a solution to get in. Kevin, always eager to get involved, quickly offered an answer. "I can get you a press pass," Kevin said confidently. "Something discreet. It won't make you look like guests, but at least you won't raise suspicions." Josh accepted, though with some unease. He knew he was crossing a line with Angel, but he also knew the risk was too great not to take every precaution. That afternoon, Kevin handed him the press pass along with a small microphone they could use as a backup to record Sandoval's conversation. When Josh returned to Angel's apartment and showed her the microphone, she looked at him with suspicion. "Is Kevin involved?" she asked coldly. Josh swallowed hard before answering. "Just a little. He doesn't know much beyond the basics, but he got this for you in case you need it." Angel hesitated, but finally accepted the device, making it clear she didn't want Kevin present at the gala. If something goes wrong, Josh, I want you to walk away. I don't want to drag you down with me. I'm not leaving you alone, Angel. We're in this together now. She didn't respond, but her expression seemed to soften for a brief moment. As the night of the gala approached, the tension between them grew. For Angel, this was the culmination of years of pain and planning. For Josh, it was a test of how far he was willing to go for someone he barely knew, but whose cause had become his own. In the final moments before they parted ways, Josh looked at her with a mix of admiration and fear. "This is going to work," he said, trying to sound confident. Angel nodded, though her eyes betrayed the storm raging within her. "It has to work," she replied, almost to herself. And with that, they prepared for a night that would change their lives forever. The night of the charity gala arrived with an air of opulence that brutally contrasted with the tension Angel and Josh felt. The event took place in an imposing hall, with marble columns and gleaming chandeliers reflecting the extravagance of its guests. From the outside, the illuminated building seemed like a world apart, a place where the masks of charity and success concealed the shadows of corruption Angel knew all too well. They arrived separately, following the agreed plan. Angel wore a modest but elegant dress, purchased second-hand, and light makeup that hid the dark circles from her sleepless nights. Her fake ID passed without issue at the entrance, though her heart raced as she crossed the doors of the grand hall. Once inside, she blended in with the guests, keeping a low profile and observing every detail. Josh, meanwhile, was dressed as a waiter, wearing a uniform he had obtained through a contact at a restaurant where he occasionally worked. With a tray in hand, he moved between tables, serving glasses of champagne, but his real mission was far more dangerous. He carried the microphone Kevin had provided, hidden and ready to be planted near Sandoval at the right moment. From her corner, Angel saw Sandoval enter the hall with his characteristic air of confidence. He wore an impeccable suit, and his charismatic smile completely belied the man Angel knew him to be. He moved easily among the attendees, greeting businessmen and politicians while receiving praise for his generosity and commitment to social causes. Angel's anger grew as she watched him, so relaxed and indifferent to the lives he had destroyed. But she knew she couldn't let her emotions take over. She had to remain calm and calculated. Sandoval sat at one of the central tables, surrounded by partners and collaborators. From there, his voice carried confidently as he spoke about investments and philanthropic projects. Josh, still holding his tray, approached Sandoval's table. Using his best acting skills, he served drinks with a neutral smile, raising no suspicion. While placing a glass near Sandoval, he discreetly slid the small microphone under the tablecloth. His heart pounded, but he managed to maintain his composure. Then he moved away, blending in once again with the other waitstaff. From her position, Angel watched every move. When Josh gave her a slight nod, she knew the microphone was in place. Now all they had to do was wait. The tension in the room was imperceptible to the other guests, but for Angel and Josh, every second felt endless. Through an earpiece connected to the microphone, Angel began listening to the conversation at Sandoval's table. At first, it was all trivial remarks, jokes among partners, and mutual compliments. But then, the conversation took a darker turn. "Those contracts up north," one of the partners said in a low tone. "Are you sure everything's covered? The press has been poking around lately." "There's nothing to worry about," Sandoval replied calmly. "My contacts in the judicial system have taken care of it. You know how it works. Pay enough, and the problems disappear." Angel clenched her fists at those words. There it was, proof that Sandoval not only evaded justice in her family's case, but continued to operate with impunity. But it wasn't enough. She needed something more concrete, something that directly tied him to the accident. As Angel listened, she felt someone watching her. Turning around, she noticed a security guard scanning the crowd. Though she tried to remain calm, the guard began walking toward her. Angel decided to move, blending into the crowd, but her nervousness caused her to bump into a waitress, spilling a glass of wine. The sound of the glass shattering drew several glances, including Sandoval's. For a moment, his eyes locked with Angel's. He frowned, as if trying to place her face. Angel felt adrenaline surge through her. She had to act quickly. At that moment, Josh, who had been watching from a distance, realized something was wrong. He approached Angel, pretending to clean up the broken glass. "We need to get out of here," he whispered. Angel nodded, but just as they began moving toward a side exit, one of Sandoval's partners noticed something under the tablecloth. With a sharp gesture, he pulled out the hidden microphone. "What's this?" he asked, alarmed. Sandoval, seeing the device, stood up, his face a mask of controlled fury. The guards began moving, alerted to the situation. Josh grabbed Angel's hand and led her toward a side exit he had scouted earlier. They ran down a narrow hallway as the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Finally, they found a back door that led to the parking lot. Once outside, Angel leaned against a wall, trying to catch her breath. "We lost the recording," she said, her voice strained. Josh, equally out of breath, tried to reassure her. "But we have something else. What you heard. We can still use it." Angel shook her head, her frustration evident. "It's not enough. We need tangible evidence. This won't be enough to bring him down." Josh didn't know what else to say. They had escaped, but the night they had hoped would be their breakthrough had ended in partial failure. As they walked toward a car Kevin had arranged for them, they both knew they were in more danger than ever. Sandoval now knew they were after him, and he wouldn't stand idly by. Although the mission hadn't gone as planned, something in Angel had shifted. It wasn't just anger she felt now, it was a deeper determination, fueled by the knowledge that Sandoval was close to falling. They just needed one final push. But how much were they willing to risk to achieve it? The first few days at Teresa's apartment offered a brief respite for Angel and Josh. The small space provided a refuge away from prying eyes and constant pressure. Teresa, with her kindness and discretion, gave them what they needed most, a safe space to plan and recover. However, the calm didn't last long. One afternoon, while Teresa was out and Josh was scouring the internet for possible connections between the names Angel had overheard at the gala, an unexpected sound broke the silence. A sharp knock on the door. Angel, seated near the window, tensed instantly. Josh approached cautiously, but before he could ask who it was, an envelope slid under the door. There was no verbal message, only the sound of retreating footsteps. Josh picked up the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a newspaper clipping, a photograph of Angel and her family, and a handwritten note in black ink with a simple but chilling message. "Final warning. Stop, or they're next." Angel's heart raced. She recognized the threat immediately, not just from the words, but from how precisely it targeted her deepest wound. The photograph of Andrew and Sophie seemed to scream at her from the paper. There was no doubt Sandoval had discovered they were still moving against him. "This isn't just a warning. He's telling us he can do worse," Angel said, trying to sound firm, but Josh noticed the tremor in her voice. "We can't stay here," he replied quickly. "If they found out where we are, none of us are safe. Not us, not Teresa." Angel clenched her teeth, staring at the photograph. Her determination remained intact, but it was now tinged with fear. "Then we have no choice. We have to strike first." Josh understood what she meant. They couldn't wait any longer. Talking to Kevin, investigating the leads they had, and exposing Sandoval were no longer just options. They had become urgent necessities. That night, while Teresa slept, Josh and Angel began preparing to leave. They packed only the essentials and discussed their next move. Josh contacted Kevin, who responded with a mix of concern and excitement. To him, the level of threat only confirmed they were onto something big. "We need to meet early tomorrow," Kevin said over the phone. "I've got something new on one of the names you mentioned at the gala, but moving around won't be easy now that Sandoval's on alert." Angel was hesitant to trust Kevin, but she knew they needed all the help they could get. They agreed to meet in a neutral spot, a discreet cafe in a distant neighborhood. The next day, as they walked to the meeting point, Angel couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. Every passerby, every parked car, felt like a potential threat. Josh, though trying to stay calm, shared her paranoia. At the cafe, Kevin was already waiting for them with a thick folder on the table. When he saw them enter, he raised a hand to greet them and led them to a secluded corner. "This is getting dangerous," Kevin began without preamble, pushing the folder toward Angel. "But we've got something solid. One of the names you mentioned at the gala, a Roberto Cespedes, is tied to a shell company Sandoval uses to divert funds. Here are documents connecting him directly." Angel flipped through the papers quickly. There were bank statements, property records, and leaked emails that seemed to back up Kevin's claim. "This is good," she admitted, though her tone remained cautious. "But it's not enough. Sandoval has walked away from things like this before." "It won't be enough if we don't make noise about it," Kevin replied, leaning in. "We need something more visible. If we can get a statement from someone close to him, something that confirms his involvement, we can take him down." "And how do we get that?" Josh asked. Kevin gave them a serious look. "Sandoval has enemies, even within his circle. People who've worked with him and know too much. If we can convince one of them to talk, we can seal the case." Angel hesitated. While the idea was logical, she knew approaching someone from Sandoval's inner circle was a massive risk. Still, she was willing to consider it if it meant making progress. "Give me a name," she finally said. Kevin nodded and pulled another sheet from the folder. "One of his former accountants, Eduardo Rivas. He worked with Sandoval for years until an internal conflict. Since then, he's been off the radar, but my contacts say he's living in a small town outside the city. If anyone has detailed information, it's him." Silence fell over the table. Angel knew this step was riskier than anything they'd done before, but she also understood it was their only viable option. "We'll go find him," she said at last. "We don't have time to waste." That night, back at Teresa's apartment, Angel and Josh prepared for the journey. Sandoval had proven he wouldn't stop at anything, but that only made Angel more determined. If Eduardo Rivas was the key to exposing him, she was ready to face any obstacle to reach him. As they packed the last of their belongings, Josh looked at Angel. "This isn't going to be easy. You know that, right?" "None of this has been easy, Josh," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "But I'm not stopping now. I can't." Josh nodded. Though fear still lingered, something about Angel's strength inspired him. They were in Sandoval's crosshairs, but they also knew they were closer to the truth than ever. The next step would be critical, and they both knew it. The road to the small town where Eduardo Rivas was said to live was long and quiet. Angel and Josh traveled in a rental car Kevin had secured through a contact, trying to stay off the radar. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the very atmosphere grew heavier with every kilometer they drove. Despite his efforts to focus on the plan, Josh kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see a suspicious car tailing them. "Do you think he'll be willing to talk?" Josh asked, breaking the silence. Angel kept her eyes on the road, her voice calm but filled with determination. "If Eduardo worked with Sandoval, he knows what that man is capable of. If anything will make him talk, it'll be fear or regret." Josh wasn't so sure. He knew that people close to men like Sandoval had just as much to lose as they had to gain. Still, he had no intention of contradicting Angel, not when she seemed so resolute. When they arrived in the small town, the stillness of the place felt almost unreal. Narrow, silent streets and houses with a weathered air made it seem as though time had stopped there. Kevin had provided a specific address, and it didn't take them long to find a modest home with a simple facade and heavy curtains covering the windows. "This is it," Angel said, stopping the car a few meters before the house. Both got out and approached cautiously. Angel knocked on the door, firm but not aggressive. A few seconds passed with no response, but then hurried footsteps sounded from inside. A man with graying hair and a nervous expression opened the door, squinting as if trying to recognize them. "What do you want?" Eduardo Rivas asked cautiously. "We need to talk to you," Angel said bluntly. "It's about Richard Sandoval." The man tensed at the name, as if an electric shock had run through him. He eyed them suspiciously, but eventually opened the door a bit wider. "Come in quickly. You can't stay out here." The inside of the house was simple but cluttered. Eduardo led them to a small living room and closed the curtains before taking a seat in an old wooden chair. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the backrest. "Who are you?" he asked. Angel introduced herself briefly, omitting details that might alarm him further. She explained her goal: to expose Sandoval, gather definitive evidence, and force him to face justice. "You know how Sandoval operates," Angel said. "You know what he does to cover his crimes. We need your help." Eduardo shook his head almost immediately. "You don't understand what you're getting into. Sandoval isn't just a powerful man. He's ruthless. If they find out I'm talking to you, my life is over." "Your life is already ruined, Eduardo," Angel said coldly. "You're hiding out here far from everything because you're afraid of what he might do. Are you going to keep running for the rest of your life? Or are you going to do something to stop him?" The man seemed torn between paranoia and guilt. He looked at Angel, then at Josh, and finally sighed. "What do you want to know?" Over the next few hours, Eduardo recounted how he had worked as an accountant for Sandoval for years. He detailed how he helped launder money through shell companies, manipulated public contracts, and financed bribes to eliminate legal threats. But what caught Angel's attention most was the direct connection to her family's case. "The accident with your husband and daughter," Eduardo said, looking at Angel with regret. "I know. Sandoval couldn't risk a trial. There was too much at stake at the time. He bribed the police, bought off the judges, even tampered with forensic reports. It was one of the most meticulous cases we handled." Angel felt a knot in her stomach as she listened. While she had suspected this, hearing Eduardo confirm, it was like reliving the tragedy. "Do you have proof?" she asked, her voice heavy with restrained emotion. Eduardo nodded slowly. "I kept copies of some documents. At first, as insurance in case Sandoval turned on me. But then..." He paused, staring at the floor. "I realized I'd never have the courage to use them." Josh, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Then give them to us. We'll use them." Eduardo hesitated but finally stood and disappeared into another room. He returned with a thick envelope and a small hard drive. "This is everything I have," he said, handing them to Angel. "But I warn you, if Sandoval finds out about this, there won't be anywhere in the world where you can hide." Angel took the envelope, holding it tightly to her chest. For the first time in years, she felt she had something tangible, something that could change everything. They quickly returned to the car, ensuring no one was following them. As they drove back to the city, Angel leafed through the documents, astonished by the amount of incriminating evidence Eduardo had kept. There were bank transfers, emails, and even direct orders signed by Sandoval. "This is enough," Josh said, breaking the silence. "With this, we can take him down." Angel nodded, but her expression revealed something beyond satisfaction. She knew that having this evidence also put them in greater danger. They were now a real threat to Sandoval, and he would stop at nothing to protect himself. That night, as they hid in a new safe house Kevin had arranged, Angel reviewed the evidence again. Everything she had planned, everything she had fought for, was coming to a head. But she also understood that the cost of justice could be devastating. Josh, sitting beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll make it, Angel. We're too far in to back out now." She looked at him and nodded. But deep down, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Now, more than ever, they were in Sandoval's crosshairs, and the real battle was just beginning. The envelope and hard drive Eduardo Rivas had given them became the centerpiece of Angel and Josh's new strategy. The information they contained was devastating for Sandoval, bank transfers to offshore accounts, records of payments to judges and police, and emails directly implicating the businessman in numerous crimes, including the cover-up of Angel's family's accident. But while they had the evidence, they knew it wasn't enough just to possess it. They had to use it strategically, and that meant taking even greater risks. In the small refuge provided by Kevin, the three of them sat around a makeshift table. Kevin had brought his laptop and a portable projector to analyze the digital files on the hard drive. The room was charged with tension as the journalist combed through the files, pausing at the most incriminating ones. "This is pure gold," Kevin said, pointing to a transaction that matched payments made to bribe the judge handling the accident case. "If this goes public, Sandoval won't be able to escape. Even his most powerful contacts will have trouble covering for him." "It's not that simple," Angel interrupted, arms crossed. "We can't rely on the media alone. How many times have we seen stories vanish or get twisted when enough money is involved? We need something more decisive." Kevin, though slightly irritated by her distrust, nodded. "You're right. But we also need allies. This is too big for us to handle alone." "Allies like who?" Josh asked, concerned. Kevin paused before answering. "International organizations, anti-corruption groups, even independent media outlets that can't be bought. If we can make this story go global, it'll be harder to suppress." Angel seemed to consider the idea, though her face still showed doubt. "And how do we contact those people without Sandoval finding out? If we make one wrong move, he'll come for us before we can publish anything." "Leave that to me," Kevin replied confidently. "I have contacts in a couple of organizations that might take an interest in this, but I'll need time to set it up." While Kevin worked on reaching out to potential allies, Angel and Josh discussed their next steps. Angel couldn't sit idle while they waited. Every passing minute increased the risk of Sandoval finding them. They needed to do something to keep him on edge, something to force him into making mistakes. "We have to pressure him," Angel said, her eyes fixed on the documents in front of her. "If we corner him enough, he might slip up. A desperate move could give us the upper hand." Josh, though more cautious, understood her logic. "How do you plan to do that?" Angel pointed to a series of emails discussing an upcoming infrastructure project funded with laundered money. "This project is his next big move. If we leak information connecting it to corruption before it's completed, he won't just lose credibility, he'll draw the attention of the authorities." Josh nodded, though he still had reservations. "And what if he finds us before we can leak everything? This could make him even more dangerous." "We're already targets, Josh." Angel looked at him directly. "What matters now is acting before he does." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Kevin managed to establish contact with an independent journalist working for an international outlet. After reviewing some of the evidence, the journalist agreed to publish a comprehensive exposé on Sandoval's crimes, but only if they could provide an additional testimony to corroborate the documents. This brought them back to square one, needing Eduardo Rivas. Convincing him to go public would be a monumental task, but they knew it was crucial. Kevin volunteered to handle the conversation, arguing that he had experience persuading reluctant sources. When Kevin visited Eduardo, the accountant reacted with a mix of fear and frustration. "What part of this will get me killed? Don't you understand?" Eduardo said, pacing his small living room. "Eduardo, listen to me," Kevin insisted. "You're already implicated, whether you like it or not. Sooner or later, Sandoval will figure out you handed over those documents. The only way to protect yourself is to get ahead of him. If you speak first, if you become the witness who exposes him, it'll be harder for him to touch you." Eduardo stopped pacing and took a deep breath. He knew Kevin was right, but his fear was paralyzing. "If I talk, I need guarantees, protection, something to make sure I don't end up dead in a ditch." "Let me handle that," Kevin promised. "With my contacts, we can ensure your testimony is protected and published internationally. Sandoval won't be able to silence you without drawing more attention to himself." After a long discussion, Eduardo finally agreed, though his face showed the weight of the decision he had just made. Meanwhile, Angel and Josh worked on the second part of their plan, leaking information about Sandoval's infrastructure project. Using an anonymous account, they sent incriminating details to an anti-corruption activist group which quickly began spreading the information on social media. Within hours, the story gained traction, drawing attention from journalists and citizens alike. Sandoval, realizing something was happening, reacted with fury. According to one of Kevin's contacts, his inner circle had intensified their efforts to locate the source of the leaks. Angel knew this meant they were closer to being found than they'd like. That night, while resting in their hideout, Josh watched Angel as she combed through the documents again, as if searching for something she might have missed. "Are you sure this will work?" he asked quietly. Angel looked up and, for the first time in days, allowed a small smile to cross her face. "I'm not sure about anything, Josh, but if we don't do this, Sandoval will keep winning, and I can't live with that." Josh nodded, finally understanding the depth of Angel's fight. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Justice for her family and for everyone Sandoval had destroyed along the way. The new plan was in motion, but they also knew the stakes had risen exponentially. Now, more than ever, they were in Sandoval's crosshairs, and the fight was far from over. The leaks about Sandoval's infrastructure project had begun to shake his world. International media started probing the documents shared by Angel and Kevin, while anti-corruption activists ramped up public pressure with social media campaigns. Richard Sandoval's name was gaining notoriety, but not in the way he had hoped. In their hideout, Angel and Josh stayed alert to the unfolding events. Kevin, working tirelessly from another location, prepared to publish the full exposé based on the evidence and Eduardo Rivas's testimony. But amidst the flurry of activity, something unexpected happened that would change the course of their plan. One morning, as Josh checked the encrypted emails Kevin used to stay in touch, he found a message he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't from Kevin or any of their usual contacts. The sender was unknown, but the subject line read, "Luke Sandoval wants to talk." Josh stared at the screen, hesitating. Was this a trap? A maneuver by Sandoval to infiltrate their network? But when he opened the message, it didn't match that theory. The tone was direct, but also carried a sense of sincerity. "My name is Luke. I'm Richard Sandoval's son. I know what's happening, and I need to talk to you. My father is not the man he pretends to be, and I want to help. Please tell me how I can find you." Josh couldn't believe what he was reading. Without wasting time, he called Angel, who was in the next room reviewing documents. "You need to see this," he said, pointing at the email. Angel leaned over the screen, reading carefully. Her face, initially impassive, began to show signs of confusion. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured, frowning. "Why would Sandoval's son want to help us?" "Maybe he's fed up with his father," Josh suggested. "If everything we've heard about Luke is true, he probably doesn't approve of what Sandoval does." "Or maybe it's a trap," Angel replied coldly. "We can't trust this without verifying it." They contacted Kevin to analyze the email. The journalist, as surprised as they were, decided to investigate its origin. Using tracing tools, he confirmed it came from a residence linked to the Sandoval family. While this didn't rule out the possibility of a trick, it added credibility to the idea that Luke was genuinely reaching out. "If this is real, it could be our strongest move yet," Kevin said over the phone. "But you need to be careful. If it's a trap, you're walking straight into the lion's den." Angel hesitated for a moment. She was used to taking risks, but this was different. If it was real, Luke could provide crucial information. If it wasn't, they might jeopardize everything they'd achieved so far. Finally, she made a decision. "Respond to the message, Josh, but do it cautiously. If he wants to talk, it will have to be on our terms." The response was brief but clear. "If you want to talk, we need proof that you are who you say you are. Send us something to show your intent." Hours passed before a reply came. When it did, it included an attachment, a short video of Luke, recorded in what appeared to be his bedroom. "My name is Luke Sandoval," he began, looking directly at the camera. "I know what my father has done, and I know you're trying to stop him. I'm not asking you to trust me immediately, but I can provide information that confirms everything you have. I just want to help, because I'm tired of living this lie." The video was convincing enough for Josh and Angel to proceed cautiously. They arranged a meeting in a public place, a small cafe far from areas where Sandoval might have direct influence. Kevin, ever cautious, would accompany them to ensure their safety. On the day of the meeting, Angel and Josh sat at a table near the window, where they could observe the street. Kevin was at a nearby table, pretending to be a casual customer. Half an hour passed before a tall, thin young man entered the cafe. He wore an oversized coat and a scarf that partially covered his face. Despite this, Angel recognized him immediately. It was Luke. Luke approached the table nervously and sat down without saying anything at first. His hands trembled slightly, but his gaze remained fixed on Angel. "Thank you for coming," he finally said, his voice low but steady. "I know you have every reason not to trust me, but I'm here because I want this to end." "Why now?" Angel asked bluntly. "You've lived with him your whole life. Why decide to speak up just when we're about to expose him?" Luke lowered his gaze for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "Because I'm tired of turning a blind eye. My father has always been a controlling man, willing to do anything to get what he wants. For years, I convinced myself that his methods were necessary, that he was doing the right thing. But then I learned things about what happened to your family, about what he does to protect himself, and I can't keep justifying it." Josh, who had remained silent until now, decided to speak. "What can you give us that we don't already have?" Luke pulled a small USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This contains internal records from my father's companies, contracts, transfers, even emails, showing how he manipulates his operations. It's everything I could get without raising suspicion." Angel picked up the USB, her gaze fixed on Luke. "If this is real, it could be what we need. But what do you want in return?" Luke shook his head. "Nothing. I just want the truth to come out. I'm tired of living in his shadow." Angel studied him for a moment, searching for any sign that this might be a setup. But in Luke's eyes, she saw something unexpected: regret. When the meeting ended, they returned to the refuge to analyze the USB's contents. What they found confirmed what Luke had promised: a treasure trove of incriminating information. Contracts, financial transfers, and emails laid bare Sandoval's corruption and illegal activities. It was more than they had hoped for. Angel realized at that moment that Sandoval's son had chosen to do the right thing, even at the cost of standing against his own father. However, they also understood this was a declaration of war. With the information they now had, they were closer than ever to destroying Sandoval, but they knew his reaction would be relentless. After the meeting with Luke Sandoval, the atmosphere in the refuge was tense, but full of determination. Angel, Josh, and Kevin met multiple times to analyze the USB's contents and plan their next moves. The information it contained was invaluable, but also extremely dangerous. They knew Sandoval wouldn't sit idly by. Angel sat at the table in the refuge, the digital file open on her laptop. The glow from the screen illuminated her face as she reviewed the documents one by one. The evidence on the USB was damning: forged contracts, irregular payments to officials, and offshore transactions. But what struck her most were the emails between Richard Sandoval and some of the most influential politicians in the region, discussing how to rig public bids for their benefit. Josh, seated beside her, was just as focused, reviewing the same documents on his screen. Kevin, meanwhile, was taking notes while listening to their conversation. "This is bigger than I imagined," Josh said, frowning. "If this gets to the press, it won't just bring down Sandoval. It'll shake the whole system. The implications are massive." And dangerous, Kevin added, not lifting his gaze from his notebook. The people controlling these operations won't stay quiet. They'll move heaven and earth to protect themselves. I'm sure they're already watching us. Angel looked up, her mind racing. We need to publish this now. The sooner the better. If we let this sit with us any longer, we'll lose the chance. Sandoval doesn't have much time before he starts covering his tracks. Josh got up from his chair and walked to the window, gazing at the city lights. His expression was unreadable. After a few moments, he turned around, his face serious. I know, but I also know this could cost us far more than we think. Sandoval isn't just another corrupt politician. He has powerful connections. We're talking about people who won't hesitate to eliminate any threat. I'm not sure we're ready for everything that's coming our way. Kevin, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. Josh is right, but it's also the only way this will mean something. If we don't act now, if we don't use this information, then everything will have been for nothing, and Sandoval will keep operating like nothing happened. After hours of discussion, the decision was made. It was time to take the next step. With the information provided by Luke, the article Kevin had been preparing needed to be published, and the evidence had to be securely distributed to international media and anti-corruption organizations. However, they couldn't do this directly, not without ensuring the message reached the right people. Angel contacted a trusted journalist abroad, a woman with years of experience investigating international corruption. They knew local media could easily be manipulated by Sandoval's circle, but international outlets would be more independent. Josh handled distributing the files to a network of activists. They couldn't risk interference with the leak, so everything had to be done through secure channels, leaving no trace. Kevin took charge of finalizing the article, which included Eduardo Rivas's testimony and key evidence from the emails and contracts. The story, once published, had to make it clear how Sandoval had manipulated the system to enrich himself at the expense of the people, and how, thanks to the bravery of individuals like Luke and Rivas, the truth was finally being exposed. Before everything went public, Angel had one last task. She needed to confront Eduardo Rivas, the former official who had been willing to cooperate from the start. He had been the key to understanding how the corruption system operated, and now he needed to be protected. She met him at his apartment, a small and discreet place far from the city, as agreed to avoid surveillance. Eduardo opened the door and greeted her with a serious expression. "Is everything ready?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Angel nodded, not wasting time. "Everything's set. The article is almost ready to publish. Luke's information has been corroborated, and international media outlets are waiting. We're about to take the next step." Rivas nodded slowly, but his face showed worry, not satisfaction. "What happens next? What's Sandoval going to do when he sees all this?" he asked, narrowing his eyes at Angel. "That's what concerns me," she replied, pressing her lips together. "We're going up against a man who has the power to destroy us, and not just us. This fight is much bigger than a couple of names." "Are you prepared for the consequences?" Rivas asked, stepping closer, as if searching her face for doubt. Angel looked at him firmly. She knew what he meant. This wasn't just about justice. This was a battle where losing meant losing everything. "I am," she said with determination, "because the truth has a price, and I'm willing to pay it." The night they decided to release the leak, the tension in the air was palpable. The entire team was gathered in the refuge, waiting for the exact moment. Kevin had already uploaded the article, and Josh had done a final check of the documents. All that remained was to press publish. At that moment, Angel stood and walked to the window, gazing at the city that had witnessed her struggle. She knew there was no turning back, not even if she wanted to. But at the same time, she felt she had reached the end of a long road. Whatever came next could no longer be stopped. Josh looked at Angel, concern etched on his face. "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" he asked. Angel met his gaze, a flash of determination in her eyes. "There's no turning back now. This is where the real battle begins." With one last look at the city, she pressed the button. The article was published. The evidence was distributed. The war for the truth had just begun. The impact of the article and the leaks hit Sandoval where it hurt most: his public image. Social media exploded with accusations, and international media demanded answers. But far from surrendering, Sandoval reacted with fury. He intensified the search for those who had betrayed him, pulling strings in a desperate attempt to contain the damage. Meanwhile, Angel, Josh, and Kevin prepared for the final blow. The information obtained from Luke and Eduardo had strengthened their cause, but they knew only direct action could close the circle. The opportunity came with an unexpected message from Luke. Sandoval would be at his private residence, completely isolated, planning his defense. "This is it," Angel said, a mixture of resolve and anger in her voice. "We can't wait for him to regroup. We have to confront him directly." Josh and Kevin exchanged worried glances. A face-to-face confrontation with Sandoval was dangerous, but they knew Angel wouldn't accept any other option. Sandoval's residence was located on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls and advanced security systems. With Kevin waiting in a nearby car, Angel and Josh infiltrated the estate using fake credentials Luke had provided. As they moved through the silent, opulent hallways, the tension grew thicker with each step. Finally, they reached a grand room with walls adorned with expensive art and luxurious furniture. Sandoval sat in a leather chair, reviewing documents with a glass of wine in hand. As he looked up and saw them enter, a cold smile spread across his face. "Well, well, if it isn't the little warrior," he said, setting the glass down on the table. "I wondered how long it would take you to show up." "You knew I'd come," Angel said, her gaze fixed on him. Sandoval leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Of course I did. People like you always come back. But tell me, what do you expect to achieve here? A confession? An apology?" He laughed with disdain. "You'll get neither." Angel stepped forward, ignoring the stares of the guards flanking the door. "I'm not here for your apologies. I'm here to make sure you know you can't escape what you've done. Not to me, not to my family." Sandoval raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Your family?" "Ah, yes. The accident. What a tragedy. But tell me, what does that have to do with me? It was an unfortunate error. Life goes on, doesn't it?" Those words hit Angel like a blow, but she didn't let them break her. Instead, she pulled a document from her pocket, a copy of the modified forensic report Eduardo had provided, and threw it onto the table in front of Sandoval. "This has everything to do with you, Richard. This report was tampered with to cover for you. The police, the judges, even the doctors, everyone was bought off to protect you, to erase any trace of your responsibility. You killed my husband and my daughter, and then you bought your way out as if their lives meant nothing." Sandoval picked up the document calmly, glanced at it briefly, and let it fall back onto the table. "And if I did," he said, his voice cold and calculating, "do you think crying in front of me will change anything? Your husband and daughter are dead, and nothing you do will bring them back." The rage Angel had suppressed for years exploded. "They weren't just my husband and daughter. They were people, Richard. My daughter was 6 years old. Her life had barely begun, and you destroyed it." Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with determination. "And the worst part is, you didn't even have the courage to face what you did. You hid behind your money, like the coward you are." Sandoval rose from his seat, his expression hardening. "Coward," he said, his tone threatening. "I'm no coward, Angel. I'm a survivor. I do what needs to be done to protect what's mine. Your family was collateral damage. Tragic, yes, but necessary. If you can't accept that, it's your problem." Josh, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. "Collateral damage? Is that what you tell yourself to justify everything you do? You're a murderer, Sandoval, and now the world knows it." Sandoval laughed dismissively. "The world? Do you think the world matters to me? All this, he said, gesturing around the room, all this noise can be silenced with enough money. People like you are insignificant. You have no power. You have no influence. You are nothing. Angel, breathing heavily, stepped closer, standing just a few steps away from Sandoval. Maybe we don't have your money or your power, but we have something you'll never have. The truth. And this time, you won't be able to bury it. Sandoval stared at her, his eyes a mix of hatred and contempt. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Angel and Josh's breathing. When Angel and Josh turned to leave, one of the guards moved to block their path. But Sandoval raised a hand. "Let them go," he ordered, his tone icy. "They've had their moment. But remember this, Angel. In the end, money always wins. Always." Angel looked at him one last time before leaving the room. "Not this time, Richard. Not this time." As they left the residence, they knew they had risked everything by confronting him directly. But they also knew they had planted a seed, the certainty in Sandoval's mind that his empire was crumbling, and that the truth he had tried so hard to bury would finally catch up with him. Back at the refuge, Angel sat in silence, replaying every word of the confrontation. Though it had been painful, she also felt a sense of release. She had said everything she had held back for years, facing him head-on. Now, all they could do was wait for the evidence and public pressure to do their work. "You did it," Josh said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You faced him, and he couldn't deny it. He's cornered." Angel nodded, but didn't smile. She knew the cost of this fight hadn't been fully paid. The truth had come to light, but the monster they were facing still had claws. Angel was ready for whatever came next. The media storm became impossible to ignore. With the leaks, documentary evidence, and the testimonies of Eduardo Rivas and Luke Sandoval, public opinion had condemned Richard Sandoval long before the justice system could act. News outlets repeated his name incessantly, dissecting every detail of the allegations, while protests demanded his imprisonment. He was a powerful man, but for the first time, his power wasn't enough. In his luxurious office, Richard Sandoval stared silently at the screens before him, displaying devastating headlines. Corruption at the highest level. Sandoval's cover-up network exposed. Betrayal from within. Testimonies reveal the truth. His usually stoic face now showed signs of exhaustion and fear. Luke, his son, sat in a chair across from him. The confrontation with Angel and the public revelations had left him cornered. But what truly unsettled him was Luke. "What do you want me to do, Dad?" Luke finally asked, his voice a mix of anger and sadness. "Pretend none of this is real? Follow your example?" Sandoval looked at him with tired eyes. For the first time, he saw his son not as an extension of his legacy, but as an individual, someone who still had a chance to build a different path. "You don't understand what it means to protect your family," Sandoval replied, his tone less severe than usual. Luke didn't hesitate. "Yes, I do. But protecting your family doesn't mean destroying others. Everything you did, it wasn't for me, it was for yourself. And now, here we are. You taught me that money could buy everything. But what happens when even that can't save you?" Sandoval gritted his teeth but didn't respond. He knew Luke was right. He knew he had lost control. Finally, after a long silence, he made a decision. "Call a press conference," he instructed his assistant, who had been waiting outside the office. "It's time to speak." Hours later, cameras lined up in front of a table where Sandoval took a seat. His face was gaunt, and though he tried to project the authority that had always defined him, it was clear he was defeated. Beside him, Luke sat with a serious expression. Journalists began firing questions, but Sandoval raised a hand to request silence. "I've made grave mistakes," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "For years, I used my position to manipulate the system, to protect myself and my interests at any cost. I bribed, lied, and destroyed lives." He paused as camera flashes lit up his face. Today, I accept responsibility for my actions, not because it's the right thing to do, but because I can no longer let my son carry the weight of my sins." The room fell into a heavy silence. Every word Sandoval uttered was another hammer blow to his empire. He admitted his role in systemic corruption, detailed how he had manipulated the case of Angel's family's accident, and confessed to paying off authorities to silence them. "To the family of Andrew and Sophie Smith," he said finally, looking directly into the camera, "I cannot undo what I took from you, but I hope that one day you find peace knowing the truth has finally come to light." Angel watched the confession from the refuge, with Josh and Kevin by her side. Sandoval's words echoed through the small room, but she could barely hear them. She had waited years for this moment, imagining how it would feel to see him admit his crimes, to watch him confront the weight of his actions. Yet, instead of satisfaction, she felt something deeper, more complicated. "How do you feel?" Josh asked quietly, breaking her train of thought. Angel didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, but her mind was elsewhere, on happy days with her husband and daughter, on the laughter that once filled their home before everything changed. She had spent years seeking justice, avenging her loss, but now that the moment had come, she realized it didn't bring back what she had truly lost. "I don't know," she admitted at last, her voice heavy with emotion. "I thought this would make me feel free. But Andrew and Sophie are still gone. Everything I did, everything I risked, doesn't bring them back." Josh stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "No, it doesn't bring them back. But this is bigger than you, Angel. It's for them, but it's also for everyone who suffered because of people like Sandoval. Today, you did something no one thought was possible. You showed the world the truth." Angel nodded slowly, letting tears roll down her cheeks. She had spent so long consumed by pain and rage that she had forgotten what it meant to look toward the future. Now, for the first time, she felt a faint possibility of peace. In the press room, Sandoval concluded his confession with one final statement. "I will hand over all the evidence I possess and cooperate with authorities. I do not ask for forgiveness. I only hope the weight of my actions falls on me and not on those I love." The broadcast ended, and Sandoval's figure disappeared from the screens. For him, everything was over. But for Angel, it was the beginning of something new, a path toward healing and rebuilding what could still be saved. In the silence of the refuge, Angel closed her eyes and murmured, almost in a whisper, "Andrew, Sophie, this was for you. It will always be for you." The days following Richard Sandoval's public confession were a whirlwind of emotions for Angel and Josh. While the weight of the confrontation and exposure still lingered, they knew their fight had reached a turning point. For the first time in years, there was no immediate enemy to face. Now, they had to face something more challenging, their own lives. Angel had spent years trapped in pain and vengeance, but with Sandoval exposed and the evidence in the hands of authorities, she began to look forward. However, the emptiness she felt was undeniable. Her entire world had revolved around seeking justice for her family, and while she knew she had achieved something important, the future remained uncertain. It was Josh who nudged her toward the first step. One afternoon, as they walked through a nearby park, he mentioned a local organization that supported victims of violence and corruption. The group worked to provide legal and emotional resources to families facing situations similar to what Angel had endured. "You should talk to them," Josh suggested. "Your experience, everything you've been through, you could help so many people who don't even know where to start." Angel looked at him skeptically at first. The idea of constantly reliving her pain didn't appeal to her, but as she reflected, she realized that perhaps this was a way to honor her husband and daughter. If she could prevent other families from going through the same, then her fight would have even more meaning. Weeks later, Angel began volunteering with the organization. At first, She helped with basic tasks, but soon she started sharing her story in workshops and conferences. With every word she spoke, she felt a small part of her pain transform into something else. Strength, resilience, and a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. As Angel found her place in social justice organizations, Josh also began redefining his life. From the start, his role had been to stand by Angel, supporting her in her fight. But now, with the truth exposed, he realized he had more to offer. He had spent years ignoring his passion for writing, but the story he had lived alongside Angel inspired him to return to it. Night after night in his small apartment, he poured his memories onto the pages of an old notebook he had found in a forgotten corner. Words flowed as he relived every detail. The first meeting with Angel at the store, the nights of planning, the fear, and the confrontation with Sandoval. His story wasn't just about corruption and justice, it was about how ordinary lives could rise against extraordinary powers, about the courage of a woman who refused to give up, and how that changed not only her life, but also his. One afternoon, Josh nervously shared the first chapters with Angel. She read them silently, and when she finished, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful, Josh. Telling this story is important. Not just for me, but for everyone still fighting." Her words fueled his determination to continue. Eventually, Josh decided to share the story with an independent media outlet, which quickly published excerpts as a series of articles. The response was overwhelming. Readers from across the country sent messages of support, thanking Josh for giving voice to a struggle many recognized as their own. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Angel began to feel something she once thought impossible: peace. It wasn't a constant feeling, and the wounds of her loss were still present, but there were moments when she could breathe without the weight of the past crushing her. One day, while organizing a workshop for families at the organization, she realized she was smiling, and that it wasn't forced. For the first time in a long while, she felt she had found a place where she belonged. Josh, meanwhile, completed his manuscript and began receiving offers to publish it as a book. Though hesitant about commercializing something so personal, Angel encouraged him. "This story isn't just ours. It belongs to everyone who believes justice is worth fighting for, no matter how hard it is to achieve." In time, Josh's book became a success, with much of the proceeds directed to supporting organizations like the one Angel now led. One sunny afternoon, in a park filled with children playing, Angel and Josh sat on a bench, watching the world around them. Angel held a small bouquet of flowers she had picked from the community garden where she now volunteered. "You know," she began, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd get here. I always believed my life ended the day I lost them. But now, I feel like something new is starting." Josh smiled, looking at her with admiration. "You've always been stronger than you think. And now, you're using that strength for something incredible." Angel nodded, letting the sun warm her face. She still carried the weight of her loss, but she also knew she had found a way to move forward. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was enough. "Thank you, Josh, for everything." "Thank you, Angel, for showing me that even in the deepest pain, there's always something worth fighting for." They sat in silence, watching the children run and laugh as the sun began to set on the horizon. Though their paths had been difficult, they had found in each other a reason to keep going, building something new from the ashes of their lives. Justice had been served, but more importantly, they had found a way to heal, together. The days passed slowly, marked by routine and small steps as Angel and Josh rebuilt their lives. Though the shadow of Sandoval still lingered in their thoughts, they both knew the world had changed because of their efforts. Then one day, as Angel sifted through the mail in the refuge they still shared, she found an envelope with no return address. It was a letter. The handwriting on the front was firm, but bore a slight awkwardness that suggested uncertainty. When she opened it, the first name she read stopped her breath. Dear Angel. It was from Luke Sandoval. Noticing the tension on her face, Josh set down what he was doing and sat beside her. "What does it say?" he asked cautiously. Angel began reading aloud. "Dear Angel, I don't know how to begin this letter. My first reaction was to never write to you. What could I say that wouldn't sound hollow or inadequate? But after everything that's happened, after seeing what my father has done and what you've accomplished, I feel I can't stay silent. I want you to know that I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I understand that it's not something I can ask for, and I probably never will deserve it. But I want to tell you that I'm sorry. Not just for what my father did, but because for a long time, I chose not to see the truth. I preferred the comfort of ignoring what was happening. And for that, I am also responsible. Your fight and your courage have taught me something I never learned from my father. That power isn't about what you possess, but what you choose to stand for. That's why I want to tell you that I'm trying to change. I've started working with an organization that fights corruption, and every day I strive to be better than I was yesterday. I don't know if that will ever be enough, but I'm determined to try. I want you to know that even if we never cross paths again, I will always remember what you did. You gave me the courage to face my father, to break free from the weight of what he represented. For that, and though it's not enough, thank you. Respectfully, Luke Sandoval. When Angel finished reading, she sat in silence, letting the words settle in her mind. Josh watched her carefully, hesitant to interrupt. "What do you think?" he finally asked. Angel placed the letter on the table and exhaled deeply. "I think he's sincere," she said, her voice heavy with contained emotion. "And I think, on some level, this is what I always hoped would happen, that someone in that family would understand the harm they caused and decide to change." Josh nodded, but didn't say anything. He knew this moment wasn't his to fill with words. Angel needed to process it in her own way. That afternoon, like many others, Angel and Josh walked through the nearby park. It was a simple place, with dirt paths and wooden benches, but its simplicity offered them a sense of calm. Children played around them, their laughter filling the air as leaves fell gently from the trees with the wind. Angel carried Luke's letter in her bag, a reminder of how far they had come. "Do you think Luke will really change?" Josh asked, breaking the silence. Angel thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know, but I think he wants to. And sometimes, wanting to change is the first step." She paused, watching a child run by with a toy in hand. "For so long, I thought my life ended the day I lost them. But now I realize the fight wasn't just for Andrew and Sophie. It was for me. For everyone who doesn't have a voice. Even for people like Luke." Josh nodded, respecting the weight of her words. Then he looked at her with a soft smile. "It's incredible how you've changed, Angel. I remember when you walked into that store just looking for a piece of bread. I never imagined that woman had so much strength. Now, I can't imagine the world without that strength." Angel looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, allowed a genuine smile to light up her face. "I couldn't have done it without you, Josh. You gave me a reason to keep going when I thought there was nothing left. Maybe I don't say it enough, but thank you." Josh shook his head, as if he didn't need to hear more. "We did this together, and now we can start living." They walked quietly along the path, letting the fresh air and the sound of leaves crunching under their feet fill the space between them. They didn't need to say more. Their lives had been transformed by the fight, but also by the bond they had built. Angel looked up at the sky, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the horizon with warm shades of orange and pink. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. Not for what she had lost, but for what she could still build. Angel's story is, above all, a testament to the human capacity to endure, even in the darkest moments. Faced with loss, injustice, and an enemy with seemingly insurmountable power, Angel not only survived, she transformed her pain into a weapon for justice. Her struggle was neither easy nor perfect, but every step she took, no matter how small, was an act of courage. Life didn't return her husband or daughter to her, but it offered something unexpected: the chance to rebuild herself, to find meaning in adversity, and to inspire others to do the same. Angel didn't become a heroine by seeking revenge. She became one because she refused to accept that the world must remain unjust. Josh, on the other hand, reminds us that even ordinary people have the power to change lives. His empathy, loyalty, and decision to stand by Angel transformed not only her life, but also his own. He found purpose in the fight and discovered that, in the end, human connections are what truly matter. And then there's Luke, a young man who, despite being raised in the shadows of power and corruption, chose to break away from that legacy. His decision to confront the truth and work for change shows that redemption is always possible, even for those who have lived on the wrong side of history. The truth is not an easy path. Facing it requires sacrifice, patience, and an inner strength that often seems unreachable. But the truth has the power to free, to change realities, to open paths where there was once only darkness. Angel and Josh's fight is proof of this. In the end, this is not just a story of justice, it is a story of hope. It teaches us that, although the world is full of injustices, resilience, connection, and determination can spark small revolutions. It reminds us that change isn't always measured by grand victories, but by the moments we choose to rise, face the impossible, and move forward. Because, as Angel discovered, justice doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it means finding the strength to heal, to help others fight, and to continue knowing that every act of truth, no matter how small, leaves a mark on the world. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of struggle, justice, and resilience. We hope it inspired you as much as it inspired us. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can learn about it. See you in the next video. Take care, and see you soon.